All right, welcome everybody. I am Paddo. With me, as always, is Umbrella and Deceptical, and we're going to be breaking down patch .20 for the Duelyst Rundown today, and we're going to kick it off with none other than everybody's favorite hot topic. It's going to be Songhai, and we see that Spiral Technique has been changed. Old version was costed 5, deal 5 damage to a minion, and 5 damage to the enemy general. New version is cost 7, and it's deal 8 damage to a minion or the enemy general. And Deceptical, I'm going to hand this one off to you as our resident Songhai player. What do you feel about how do you feel about these changes?
To put it bluntly, I am very nonplussed about this change. I've tried really hard to think of like what exactly this fixes, because I'm not saying that old Spiral Technique wasn't strong and a bit of a problem and sort of like the epitome of non-interaction, because you don't want a card to like strictly punish you for playing a minion. I understand that, but this is just like a really fat Phoenix Fire that doesn't get any extra damage through scaling for its heavy cost. It makes 8 gates worse, and I don't know. And I mean, I try really hard. I mean, I love Songhai, and it's even a little weird to me that it goes to a minion, because you're only going to use this to go to the face, in my opinion. I mean, sure, you might blow up, like, what, a Slither Elder, I think is, like, one of the few guys that hits for 8, but even then you have to deal with the egg.
Yeah.
So,
well, I think the main point, too, is, like, if you think about, like, what else, like, this, like, what's the other alternative if you wanted to go to a minion? I mean, one, there's just cheaper options, either Onyx Bear Steel, yeah, it gives the O2 dude, but it kills anything no matter what the health. And then you also have Heaven's Eclipse, which is going to, like, very quickly outscale this as, like, a damage option to kill a creature, and it only costs 3. So, like you said, it pretty much is only, like, hey, just big fat damage pile to the face. And not to compare to other games, but I feel like giant nukes like this generally like are not a beloved card like in most like CCG games. But I mean, that's just kind of my impression. I mean, I don't know where else they go with this. Maybe this is just kind of like the interim solution, because they knew like there was no like reducing the damage of Spiral Technique anymore. They kind of already went down that path. So maybe this is just kind of their response, like, hey, this is our meantime fix, and maybe we'll find something more interesting down the line to do with the card.
Yeah, and just one final note. It is some pretty wicked reach, and I mean, the large issue I have is that I don't feel like it synergizes well with a lot of Songhai tries to do, because it tries to throw out a lot of spells and use cost reducers and do really neat things. Like, I just don't feel like this synergizes as well as what like Songhai has been up to this point. But I mean, it's also kind of neat. It is kind of neat that it's a capstone, and if that's where it rests and that's where it wants to be, and we can get some more, you know, middle range spells in the future, you know, I'd be more comfortable with it.
All right, so let's hop out of the fires of the Spiral Technique changes, and let's hop into the other change this week, which is Artifact Hunter. He basically just gets cheaper and loses 1 health off of his ability. Umbrella, do you feel like this change will make him more played?
Oh, definitely. I think Artifact Hunter is very much just trying to find a place. He had a place before. It was too good. Giving you an artifact for free was just a lot of value. And I think now the problem is, now you're looking at, realistically, you probably want to play him if you want to also then hit the artifact that turn. It's probably not the most exciting, though you could do it to just like put a good artifact in your hand. So because of that, I think the cheaper he can be, the better. Which isn't to say that he needs to be a ton cheaper, but like you're not necessarily excited about like the 3/5 part of it.
Passing off to neutral minions, we actually have 2 new ones. So we have Spelljammer, which is a 3-cost 2/4. Players draw only 1 card at the end of turn, so note that we'll target both of you. And then Pandora, which is at the end of your turn, summon a 3/3 Spectral with a random keyword into a nearby space. So kind of living up to your name out of randomness. So first I'll pass this off to Deceptical. What do you feel about these neutrals, and do you see playing them in any current factions or decks?
I'll start with Spelljammer. Spelljammer is interesting because she has like really fun controlling elements to her. But the hurdle you have to get over is that she's gonna hit you first before she hits your opponent, and if your opponent responds to her, it's a little rough because then you just cost yourself a card. But I still think there will be a lot of times where she can be really brutal, and especially late game when you're both digging for that, that answer. Like if you have what you need to win, then you just need to set up. You could drop her towards later game, hoping to disrupt your opponent and slow them down. And then in Pandora's case, I think this unit's awesome. And if anything, the first thing you should do when you log in is like check her out and see her move, because she's one of the coolest animated sprites in the whole game. Her effect is really amazing. Special note, though, it says random keyword. That doesn't include faction-based keywords. Just use a neutral, so they won't have backstab or blast. So just a general disclaimer for that. I think she's going to see a lot of use in decks like Magmar and Abyss for being able to turbo her out there and getting her on the table as quickly as possible. I think Vitruvian likes, having a bunch of dudes around, and and even Lionar and Songhai could probably do some fun stuff. But yeah, she's cool. Her ability's fun. It's hard to counter and anticipate, and creates a lot of interesting scenarios. I think she's a really amazingly designed card.
Yeah, Pandora definitely the new fun big neutral body that we're seeing come in here with this patch. So moving on, we actually have some other new cards for different factions. So Magmar get Egg Morph, which is a 3-cost spell that's turn a non-egg minion into an egg, or hatch an egg, so you can actually hatch one of your eggs that's already been egged already, or maybe you have Chrysalis Burst out and you just pump out that Slither Elder that happened to spawn as kind of like a combo. Let's go with Deceptical on this one. Like how do you feel like this changes Magmar, and is this a big factor card, or do you feel it just kind of being like Mind Steal, where people are on the fence of like whether it's like this has to go in the deck or it doesn't?
I find Egg-Morph to be particularly powerful because it has that pseudo effect that Dark Transformation has, where it not only does it kill the minion, but since it replaces its space, it destroys things like similar effects where sometimes you get something out of the minion dying or whatever. It's really neat that it has like sort of a rescue mechanic if you lose one of your rebirth guys, but you start your turn and they're aid, you can just like pop them back, or you can churn out an early Slither Elder. He'll make an aid, and then you can unleash his brother much sooner. Like it does a whole lot of things for a whole lot of decks, and it's only going to be good for Magmar, and it's only going to get better. I think it's a very aggressively cost removal card that is really good.
Umbrella, do you think this edges out do you think this card kind of replaces like the slot that might have been held by like stuff like Natural Selection?
I think it's tough because I think we're seeing a lot of Magmar decks. We're seeing it's very common to absolutely have Mana Burn and absolutely have Plasma Storm, and then maybe sometimes having Natural Selection. Natural Selection doing a lot of really cool things, having a lot of cool versatility, but not being as reliable as just like straight up burning the abilities off of something. I think Egg Morph is really cool, like Deceptical said, for removing something and replacing that space, which can limit it in a lot of ways. I think it's hard to say exactly how good it is because it's one of those cards that does so many different things. The removal part of it is awesome. It might, in a lot of situations, it might not be as good as Mana Burn. If you don't have a follow-up way to kill off the egg, presumably it will rebirth into the unit, so it might not help you out as much. But if they're anywhere near you, lots of versatility there. I think the idea of hatching an egg is really cool. I think it's mostly going to be relevant with Silithar Elder. I saw a lot of people in the spoiler in Hip Chat where Eric mentioned it, a lot of people saying like, oh, I wish I still had my like Chrysalis Bursts. I'm not sure it really works perfectly with Chrysalis Burst. Chrysalis Burst is fun, but I feel like for 7, you're either getting 1 guy and 2 eggs for 2 cards, which is not very exciting, or a lot of times you're like playing Chrysalis Burst and hatching it slightly earlier. I don't know if there's as much synergy there as I seem to see in the chat, so I just wanted to speak to that. But it's definitely a very cool card. I'm really glad that Magmar gets something like very interesting.
Yeah, for sure. And let's move on to Liner. Liner actually gets basically what used to be Mistwalking. Do you guys feel like Aerial Rift is... Do you feel like it's better, I guess, now that it draws you your card?
So when I first saw the card, I went, "What is this for?" Like it didn't make sense to me at all, like right out of the box. And then I thought a lot more on it, and it occurred to me like a lot of Lionar's strategy typically is to move as this like ball of dudes to keep your zeal up. But there's times where you want to summon, like maybe you want to make like Lionar ranged, and you don't want to like taper out your dudes to like create a daisy chain to get the ranged guy where you want. You can just cast this card, like drop the ranged guy where you want, and then draw back for the cost of casting the spell. It also like synergizes with neutrals, and of course not every Lionar guy is gonna have zeal on it, so there will be better options for it too. And, you know, a lot of people have been talking about, like, I'll just throw a bunch of provokes in my deck and, like, drop provokes on your face. And honestly, that sounds really fun. So it's a card where you get to be really creative with it. And it took me a while for it to sort of, like, click. And I feel like hopefully other people will have that eureka moment and be able to create some cool stuff.
Yeah, I definitely feel like it's in a better space, especially since it draws you a card now, where, like, old Mistwalking used to be like, okay, well, like, in most cases I'm not dropping multiple things at different places, so I might as well just run, you know, like, Planar Scout, right? And just, like, hop it somewhere, wherever I want, and then drop things around. But the fact that this draws you a card gives it different kind of utility, which is nice. But moving on from this, it's back, ladies and gentlemen. Darkseed used to be a spell for 4 that gave you a 10-1. Now it actually is a 3-cost spell that deals 1 damage to your opposing general for each card in the opponent's hand. Umbrella, what kind of wickedness now does this give Abyss?
Wickedness indeed. I really like this card. I think I'm one of the few people that I think Abyss is probably, according to little profile stuff, my second most played faction. But I've never been super big on Wraithlings, which sounds weird because that's a pretty big part of their strategy, which isn't to say I hate Wraithlings, but I always found the more interesting part to be more of the control, more of the late game. Really liked Shadow Creep before, like back when it was really good. Now that it's not so good, it's still usually what you're going to see me playing on ladder. And I think this card's awesome because it is a way to like kill your opponent that is different from what else is going on. Like if you play a control-y game, this can be some extra points of damage. I think it's interesting in the sense that since it's based on cards in hand, it's going to be more matchup specific. If your opponent's keeping their hand empty, it's not going to be a great card, as opposed to something like Curse of Agni, which you could usually find some way to get some value out of. But I do think it's really awesome in that it's going to give reach specifically to like verse more mid-range, more control-y decks. It's not going to help you again against people dumping their hand. But if your opponent's sitting around, if your opponent's like a Magmar player that Silhouette Tracer 3 times and then played like 5 Earth Spheres and you just want to blow your brains out, you're going to be able to play some Darkseeds to sort of like eat at that, you know, Earth Sphere health. You're probably going to have like 6 cards in hand. So it's probably going to deal 6 in the control matchup and get replaced in a different matchup. I'm pretty excited for it though.
Yeah, kind of interesting. Like I've seen, like I know that like as we move on to our next topic, which is going to be the Duelyst Community Throwdown, I know that I've seen Abyss kind of trend more towards like Songhai B, if you will, where it's like they run lots of like rush units, like they're using a lot of their buffs, and like this is kind of another card that kind of gives them like pseudo burn in a way, and like it's not powerful like in a deck that's just constantly dumping their hand. And maybe, you know, like after one match in a best of 3, right, they catch on, they're like, hey, okay, like I need to keep my hand thinner to reduce the cost of this. But like, is there any concern that like now they're gonna start to trend towards like just a lot of out of hand damage and less like on board damage?
It's definitely possible. I guess the thing though is I feel like if there is a faction that has, well, I guess that's not true. Songhai should probably have the most out of hand damage, and I don't think anyone would argue that they don't. But I feel like Abyssian's right, like close near there. most of what they have that sticks around on the board actually likes dying or embraces dying, and even a lot of the stuff they have, like Wraithling Swarm on the one hand puts a lot of presence on the board, but on the other hand it's a bunch of things that are like, hey, kill me, like I don't care if I die.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think having some out of hand for them is absolutely fine. I also think it's interesting that Darkseed doesn't actually have like a huge variance in how much damage it deals, despite the way it's worded. It can really only deal like 2 to 6 damage, and it really probably will deal more likely like 3 to 6 damage. Like your opponent's likely to have a card at the end of their turn, so it's not like a huge variance on how much damage it'll deal.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm actually really interested to see how this manifests in the wild, and considering it's a common, it's probably going to make it out there pretty early and actually be digestible for the community at large. So really interested to see how this card fares, because I think it, again, like you point out, it brings a very interesting mechanic. So moving on from this, again, we talked a little bit about it. Duelyst Community Throwdown happened this last weekend. First place was Saracen playing Abyss. Anti-Rad, who was pretty much there's only 2 Lionar players in the entire tournament, and so he got second. The other one, shout out to Mind Flares, was basically like, I might as well play Lionar because no one else is playing Lionar. So props for him for stepping up. We had Spirit Friar on Songhai, Garrett Green on Songhai took 3rd and 4th, and then 5th and 8th were, again, we see basically every faction kind of bump into the top 8, which is good to see overall. But Akratar and Vitruvian, Yaomon on Magmar, and then Fetness in Atlanta, both rocking that Abyss into the later rounds. Again, did any of you guys get a chance to watch this tournament or see some of these decks or see what was kind of happening in the meta?
I spent a lot of time before the tournament started conversing with Spirit Friar to see what his plans were, and it was really interesting to just how many decks that guy made to prepare for the tournament. As some of you saw on the stream, he had like Abyss V1, Abyss V2 versus Abyss V1 versus Abyss V2 versus Abyss V3, and just how prepared and how much that guy thinks about it was really cool. And I'm glad that he turned out to do very well and had some really creative deck choices. Like he busted out that the Oculus for Abyss to like get bigger off of Wraithlings and cool things like that. So I was only able to catch Finals B with him, and he made a really good show.
Yeah, for sure, definitely. I think Crimson Oculus being one of those really cool cards coming out and actually having a pretty like immediate like power effect in the Abyssian matchup, considering it's like you want to put out lots of dudes, but if you do that, then Crimson Oculus becomes huge. And to the point too, especially abusing Sarlacc the Immortal, basically just kill him over and over again, which actually buffs Crimson Oculus, so you can actually do some cool, almost like pseudo Abyssian kind of moves to buff it up and then swing for large amounts of damage. Umbrella, did you get a chance to catch any of the games?
I didn't get to see anything live. I definitely appreciated and watched a lot of, if not, I think I actually might have seen all of the things you uploaded to YouTube afterwards. And it seems amazing how just like more and more prepared everyone gets by the week. Like I saw, I think it was the same. It was he also had a verse Songhai deck where there's just nothing you could spiral. Like there's just nothing to spiral. He just didn't have any creatures you could spiral, which I thought was like crazy, but like really smart. It just speaks to the tournament scene in general, how interesting it is that you know, because the 2 styles of play we really have right now, for the most part, is people are grinding on the ladder, or you have these tournaments where people have the one faction that they've crafted like 3 to 10 decks for and are really, really trying to like show their expertise of this faction. So I'm really excited to see how that like continues to grow over time.
If you want to catch any of these games, you can go to youtube.com. Just basically search Paddocast. You'll find the Duelyst Community Throwdown for April 11th. You can find the playlist. It's also on the forums you can find pretty quickly. So if you want to watch any of these games, including the grand finals, definitely encourage you to go out and do that. But with that, that's going to be the end of the Duelyst Rundown for this week. Tune in next week and we'll have more patch coverage and more just community coverage of tournaments and what's going on in the community.